let's unpack this. Welcome everyone to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
This is your audio digest where we dive into the latest edition of Addis Fortune, Ethiopia's top business weekly.
That's right.
We pull out the key stories, the insights, basically give you a shortcut to being well informed.
Yeah, cut through the noise a bit.
Exactly. And today, wow, we've got quite a range. We're looking at everything from urban transport, which is undergoing a pretty bumpy transformation.
Definitely bumpy.
To these really high stakes legal battles, massive economic policy shifts, and even, the national budget and plans for exporting labor. It's a lot.
It is a lot. But what's really fascinating, I think, is how these stories, they might seem pretty separate at first glance, right?
Yeah, totally different areas.
But they're actually deeply connected. They sort of paint this picture, this panoramic view of the complex changes shaping Ethiopia right now.
A nation in motion, navigating big reforms.
Exactly. A nation navigating some really significant reforms. And the stories in Addis Fortune this week give us this unique lens to understand it all.
That interconnectedness, yeah. That's the thread we'll keep pulling on. So let's dive into one of those stories that affects millions every single day. The taxi system in Addis Abeba.
Ah, yes, the mini buses.
Picture this, right? It's maybe 5:00 p.m. near Jeanette Hotel or Mexico Square. You'd expect chaos, noise.
The usual rush hour scene.
But apparently, lately, it's been strangely quiet. Long queues, sure, but not many minivans. And commuters, like this guy Adnan Arfano, he described it as sometimes it's a stampede, people run, elbow their way through, just frustration.
And the scale is huge. We're talking 1.43 million commuters relying on these minibuses. That's, 80% of the city's transport demand.
80%. It's massive.
And this isn't exactly a new problem, but it's entering a new phase. For decades, you had this, loosely governed army of Terra Escabari, the line facilitators managing these 14-seat minibuses.
Right, the guys directing people onto the taxis.
Exactly. It created jobs, sure, but also chaos. And these persistent side payments, drivers paying extra fees, sometimes 40 birr for a round trip. Nuruddin Didamo from one of the taxi owners groups mentioned that.
So the city steps in. Yabebel Addis, head of the Transport Bureau, he's rolling out this radical reform.
Radical is the word.
They're limiting facilitators to just the first and last stops, slashing the number of terminals from, 197 down to 87?
Big cut. And trimming the workforce, too.
And the core change, moving away from cash. It's all meant to be digital now. A flat 10 birr per trip paid through Sicket Bank.
All right, so digital payments, and how's that fee distributed?
Good question. 20% goes to the city, 30% is earmarked for future transport projects, and the rest covers the facilitators' wages. Oh, and they're on a 2-year term limit now.
Interesting. So the aim is modernization, order. But this kind of change, it inevitably displaces people, right?
Absolutely. There's the human cost. The story of Biniam Gettu, for example. He used to be a facilitator. Now he's in a monastery just hoping for this promised training in welding or something.
Wow. That's quite a shift. And his union wasn't recognized.
Unrecognized. And lots of these displaced workers are just drifting back, trying to earn a fraction of what they used to. It really highlights that tension. Formalizing the informal sector sounds good.
But the transition is painful for many. And it creates these new problems, like the facilitators who are working now, allegedly, don't know the streets as well or aren't looking out for vulnerable commuters. There are even reports of theft increasing.
Yeah, and the implementation itself sounds like a real headache. Abraham Will Desenbet, a facilitator at the stadium terminal, he's quoted saying he's often overwhelmed. Drivers just pull away before payments are logged.
Compliance issues.
Big time. Compliance with the digital payments is low. Drivers worry about phone theft. Some don't have smartphones. Network connections are spotty. The whole digital divide issue.
Which leads to workarounds, I bet.
Exactly. You've got these intermediaries popping up, apparently young guys with old Nokia phones, processing the payment for the driver but charging an extra 5 birr. So the 10 birr trip becomes 15 birr.
So much for streamlining. City officials must be aware of this.
They are. Faisa Falek at the Labor and Skills Bureau talks about their training initiatives, needing IDs, registration, biometrics, aiming for real economic empowerment.
So long-term solutions, hopefully.
And academics like Burhanu Zalik support it, calling the overhaul overdue for accountability, creating space for new job seekers.
Okay, so there's support, but huge implementation hurdles. Is there any model within Addis that actually works smoothly without these facilitators?
That's a great question. And yes, apparently the Addis Abeba City bus service, they move over 1 million people a day.
without line facilitators.
Without them.
Yeah.
Dagnetu Shifara, the service head, basically says structure and respect can do the job. Plus, the city's introducing new electric buses, velocity buses with live tracking, and they've got volunteers helping out too.
So it can be done differently. That's important context.
It really is. And this whole theme of formalizing, bringing order, it connects directly to another huge sector undergoing transformation: real estate.
Ah, yes, the new draft regulation. Big news there.
It's huge. Unveiled at the 2025 Ethio Real Estate Summit. The main goal seemed to be restoring public trust after past issues and tightening up the financial side of things.
And you've got a new industry body too, right? IREDA, the Ethiopian Real Estate Developers Association.
Exactly, positioning themselves as a key player.
So what's the core of this new regulation? I heard something about pre-sales.
Yes, a pre-sale tiered finance framework. It sounds complicated, but the idea is to link how much funding a developer can access to how much they've already secured through pre-sales.
Okay, so more pre-sales mean easier access to finance.
Kind of. If they have over 80% pre-sales, maybe just a 20% loan guarantee is needed. But if they have less than 50% pre-sales, the requirements get much tougher, strict limits on fund disbursement, CFO guarantees.
And escrow accounts, that seems crucial for buyer protection.
Mandatory escrow accounts, yeah. Plus strict reporting to banks. And the penalties for not following the rules sound serious: big fines, even losing your license.
Trying to clean up the sector. But the developers must have concerns.
Oh, absolutely. Alamai Hukatema, or REDA's president, he's warning these financial guarantees could just push housing costs even higher.
Making already expensive housing even less affordable.
Right. He's also criticizing the lack of flexibility for rising input costs, VAT. They're lobbying for government help with land lease fees, import costs, exemptions for smaller projects, easier site map modifications, you know, the practical stuff.
And IREDA is trying to be proactive too, I read, like looking into bulk imports.
Yeah, they plan to talk to Ethiopian investment holdings about bulk importing materials to tackle those high prices and the foreign exchange bottlenecks, trying to solve problems themselves.
Smart move. Is the ministry showing any flexibility?
It seems like it, somewhat. An advisor mentioned they've relaxed the rules for getting discounted land leases in Addis, lowering the threshold for affordable housing projects.
Okay, that's something.
And there's a mandate for minimum housing units in industrial park areas now. Plus, importantly, they've formally sanctioned pre-sales for joint and fractional ownership models.
That fractional ownership piece is interesting. And what about foreign investment?
Another big shift. Foreign investors can now own up to 49% in joint ventures, provided they bring in foreign currency. The hope is technology transfer, skills development.
So, opening up the sector a bit. But all this regulation is happening because of the massive housing shortage, isn't it?
Exactly. The backdrop is stark. Urban population up 160% in 15 years. Addis alone needs something like 1.2 million units.
Wow. And the supply?
Way, way behind. The World Bank says nearly 500,000 homes needed nationally each year. We're building maybe 165,000 private developers, only 21,000 units over a decade.
That's tiny compared to the need. The government condo scheme is much bigger, but still not enough.
Right, over 1 million registered, but only 384,000 handed over. Still a huge gap.
And the consequence is prices just skyrocketing.
Completely. A one-bedroom condo over 1 million birr. Bigger ones up to 9 million. Construction costs are apparently 43 times higher than 25 years ago.
While salaries have barely budged in comparison.
Public salary is only 5 times higher, so naturally, very few people can get formal bank loans for housing, only 4%. You hear stories like Meseret McConan from NMC Real Estate struggling to get a loan, building entirely using my own resources.
That's not sustainable for scaling up housing. So developers are asking for more drastic measures.
Yeah, things like subsidized interest rates, free land, duty-free imports for affordable projects. But there are still worries about unclear rules, especially around fractional ownership and potential double taxation.
So the ministry is aiming for long-term stability, localization of inputs, a proper housing finance system.
Right. Localize 70% of inputs in a decade, get a housing finance proclamation drafted. The goal is clear, a robust, transparent market. But getting there, that's the challenge.
It always is, that balancing act.
Speaking of balancing acts and complex situations, let's shift again, this time to a really high-stakes legal fight involving BGI Ethiopia, the brewery.
Ah, the St. George Brewery case. This one involves claims going way back.
Way back. The plaintiff, Zudnesh G. Asrat, claims her 27% stake was unlawfully transferred. She's seeking millions in lost dividends and damages. It's about property rights, really.
And it stems from the privatization back in 1998, when Blassery's International Holding, BIH, bought St. George.
Right. But the lower court initially threw out her claim, said it was time-barred, filed too late, and just a contractual dispute.
Which is precisely what the appeal is challenging, isn't it?
Exactly. Her lawyers are arguing the court got it fundamentally wrong. They say, look, this isn't about a contract, it's about property. Registered shares aren't just any old asset.
And property claims might have different rules regarding time limits.
That's their argument. They're saying no statute of limitation should block reclaiming rightful ownership of shares. They feel the court ignored precedents and shareholder rights.
And there was that odd issue with arbitration, too.
Yes. The lower court judge apparently brought up arbitration, suggesting it should have gone that route.
Even though neither side asked for it.
Or was contractually required to use it. The appeal calls it unsolicited invocation, questioning if the judge overstepped there. Raises procedural questions.
Definitely. And then there's the evidence about the signature.
Huge point. A forensic report from just this May questions if Zidnesh's signature on the 2001 meeting minutes where the transfer supposedly happened is even real.
Suggesting forgery.
The experts cited inconsistencies, suggesting it could be forged. If that holds up, it could blow a major hole in the defense.
And the plaintiff is also claiming extraordinary circumstances, like threats.
Yes, alleging threats against her and her family back in the early 2000s, a volatile time politically. The argument is the clock on the statute of limitations shouldn't have started until it was safe for her to act.
A duress kind of argument.
Kind of. Plus, they're pointing to the old investment proclamation from 1988. Didn't that require Ethiopian investors to keep at least 27% equity?
I believe so. If BIH took 100%, that might have violated the law at the time.
Potentially undermining the whole transaction's validity. It really brings up these broader questions, about property rights, foreign investment, how commercial law evolves.
And how past deals are treated years later. What's the defense saying?
They're sticking to their guns. Solomon Emeru, their lawyer, argues she was there in 2001, she participated, she consented, and even if the signature was forged, which they deny, they argue the statute of limitations still applies, the time limit is the time limit, basically.
A complex battle indeed, with potentially big implications.
Absolutely. Okay, from legal complexities to abrupt policy shifts, let's talk about the automotive sector. Big news there, too.
The ban on importing gasoline car assembly kits. That came quite suddenly.
Very suddenly. Effective May 15th, 2025, no more imports of semi-knockdown or completely knockdown kits for gasoline cars. Only electric, hybrid, or ambulance kits allowed.
That's a huge pivot for the domestic assembly industry. They produced, over 21,000 vehicles last year, including some EVs, but mostly gasoline.
Yeah, 14 assemblers feeling pretty disoriented, as the article puts it. Mintaznot Tessera from Belayev Motors said authorities hinted at it, but never provided a firm timeline. Just boom, here it is.
So what's the government's reasoning? The bigger picture.
According to the Ministry of Industry, it's part of a 10-year strategy. They want to phase out gasoline cars, obviously, but also develop local technical skills, cut the massive fuel import bill, and tackle pollution.
Laudable goals for sure. Climate change, Forex savings.
But the immediate impact, financial shock, especially for buyers. That diesel taxi package used to be 5 million birr.
And the electric alternative.
8.5 million, with a much higher down payment. Nuruddin Didimo from another taxi association basically said it's financially out of reach for many drivers.
And that's just the cost. What about charging?
Exactly. Charging stations are still scarce outside Addis. And what about vehicles needed for field work? Those double cabin pickups. No real EV equivalent yet that fits the bill for rough terrain.
Practical hurdles. And financing for the assemblers themselves.
Also disrupted. The commercial bank, CBE, apparently stopped issuing letters of credit for gasoline kits. LCs are crucial for imports.
So assemblers can't easily bring in the parts they might have already ordered or planned for.
Right. They're stuck. Write off assets, scramble to retool for EVs, even though the market and infrastructure aren't fully ready. Tough choices.
And Customs is enforcing this strictly.
Ethiopian Customs Commission has instructions. Strict inspections, hefty penalties like twice the vehicle's value plus seizure if you try to sneak kits in.
Wow. Though the industry association is asking for exemptions for specialized vehicles, right?
Sure.
To avoid disrupting essential services.
Yeah, Sarah Caberhan from the Automotive Association made that point. Seems reasonable.
Has the ministry responded to the concerns?
They acknowledge a need for a reasonable adjustment period. They're planning meetings, talking about incentives for local EV assemblers. So, some recognition of the disruption.
But analysts are still cautious. Barakat Tesfaye, an EV consultant, He praised the green goals, but warned about the grid capacity, the lack of technicians.
Right. He suggested a more staged approach, like Norway used. Incentives first, build the charging network carefully. His point was, policy must be anchored in real-world constraints.
A sudden ban might be too much too soon. It's a massive undertaking.
It really is. And these kinds of policy decisions, they all happen within the bigger national picture, the macro fiscal context, which brings us to the federal budget.
Ah, the new budget bill. 1.93 trillion birr for 2025-26. That number is huge.
More than triple the budget from just 3 years ago. And you know the saying, budget is not destiny, but it is direction.
And the direction here seems concerning.
That's one way to put it. There's been a dramatic shift in spending. Recurrent spending, salaries, operations, the day-to-day stuff has ballooned. It's now over 61% of the budget. 5 years ago, it was under 29%.
So much more going to running costs. What about investment, capital spending?
That's shrunk, down to about 21.5% from nearly 33% 5 years ago. The article uses the phrase, eating tomorrow's seed corn to feed today's hunger. Spending more on today, less on building for tomorrow.
That has implications for long-term growth. And what about regional governments? How are they affected?
Federal transfers to them have also been squeezed significantly, down from over 36% to just 16% of the budget. It points towards centralization.
Which can create those vertical fiscal gaps, right? Where regions don't have enough funding for their responsibilities.
Exactly, leading to disparities, potentially undermining cohesion.
And the Sustainable Development Goals. How are they faring in the budget?
Not well. Funding for SDGs has been flat for 5 years straight, stuck at 14 billion birr, which sounds like a lot, but now it's less than 1%, 0.73% of the total budget.
So basically stagnating investment in areas like health and education that are crucial for long-term productivity.
And even the money that is allocated isn't always spent effectively. Implementation rates are low. The Ministry of Finance itself only managed to spend about 55% of its budget.
Why is that?
Seems to be issues with clogged procurement pipelines and frail project management, bottlenecks everywhere.
So spending is up, investment is down, implementation is weak. What does this mean for debt?
That's the ticking debt clock. Projections suggest if spending keeps rising like this and revenues don't catch up, the debt to GDP ratio could hit 60% by 2035.
Which is above the sustainable limit for low-income countries, according to the IMF and World Bank.
Right, so there's huge pressure to boost revenues, both tax and non-tax. Plus, even though the budget number looks big in birr because of depreciation and inflation, its actual value in dollars is shrinking.
Eroding the ability to import essential goods, fuel, fertilizer, medicine.
Exactly. So you put it all together. More spending on consumption, less on investment, re-centralization, high inflation, low reserves. The article suggests it risks slow burn stagnation.
Not a good outlook. What are the policy options then? What needs to happen?
The analysis points towards linking spending back to productivity, infrastructure, education, health, widening the tax base, speeding up tax reforms, stabilizing those transfers to regions.
Basically, fiscal consolidation and smarter spending. Can international partners help?
Potentially, with technical aid, loans. But only if Ethiopia presents a credible plan to get its fiscal house in order. It's a tough road. And connecting these big budget challenges to specific initiatives, let's look at the push to export skilled labor, especially seafarers, trying to earn that vital foreign currency.
Right, Minister Muferiat Kamal's vision. Moving beyond just sending domestic workers abroad to exporting skilled professionals.
And they're training quite a few, aren't they? At the Maritime Training Institute by Hirdar University, graduating over 500 marine engineers and electrotech officers a year.
With plans to double that, turning classrooms into a global talent pool, essentially.
So there's a new bill to facilitate this. What does it do?
Key things. It allows fully foreign-owned recruitment agencies, lets Ethiopian consulates handle placements even without specific agreements with the host country, and lets the ministry partner directly with foreign firms for training and certification. Trying to streamline things.
Okay, sounds ambitious, but there are hurdles.
Hefty hurdles, as the article puts it, especially the financial requirements for these recruitment agencies.
How hefty?
They need significant capital, between 5 and 20 million birr. But also they need to deposit large sums, $50,000 to $250,000 US into blocked accounts.
Blocked accounts, meaning they can't touch that money.
Exactly. Can't use it for operations, doesn't earn interest. It's a massive security deposit, basically.
Wow, that must be tough for smaller agencies.
Very tough. The Overseas Employment Agencies Federation says most agencies opposed it, and they warn maybe 80% could be forced to close. They also criticized the lack of crisis plans in the bill, the cost of annual renewals.
So, widespread resistance from the industry itself. What do economists say?
Besieged Getachew sees the potential benefit of bringing in established global maritime agencies. But he fears these high deposits will just shut out most local players, concentrating the business in a few hands.
Locking out the very agencies who've been doing this work.
That's the concern. Unless these barriers are reconsidered, he says, they risk undermining the sector they're trying to boost.
Another tricky balancing act. Okay, one final area for our deep dive today, and it affects a crucial profession. Lawyers. There's a new tax regime causing quite a stir.
Yes, the move away from the fixed-rate tax scheme, Category B, it's left thousands of lawyers in fiscal and regulatory limbo.
So what was Category B and why the change?
Category B was this simpler fixed-rate tax system used for many professions, including lawyers. The Ministry of Finance, people like Moulay Weldu, argue it's antiquated.
They want to modernize.
Modernize, expand the tax base, curb potential abuse, and, get more revenue for that big federal budget we just discussed. They want lawyers on a progressive tax system, more like regular businesses with standard accounting.
Makes sense from a tax collector's view, maybe, but the lawyers aren't happy?
Not at all. Tewodros Getachew, the Bar Association president, his core argument is that this new system conflates legal advocacy with commercial trade.
Meaning it treats lawyers just like any other business.
Exactly. He argues it ignores the unique aspects of the legal profession: public service obligations, ethical rules that limit things like advertising, the often irregular income flow. A lawyer can't operate freely like a business person, he says.
Didn't some expert committee look into this before?
Yes. A joint committee actually studied this for 2 years and specifically advised against putting legal practice under the commercial code for tax purposes.
Why?
They cited those same reasons: ethical duties, fee caps set by law, unpredictable case lengths. But apparently, Parliament overlooked those findings when passing the new tax law.
So lawyers are pointing to things like long case timelines, client money held in advance, the pro bono work they're required to do.
Right. The Ministry of Justice mandates at least 3 pro bono cases a year, but informally, lawyers estimate maybe up to 40% of their time goes uncompensated. How do you account for that in a standard business tax system?
Good question. So the fundamental issue is?
The core tension, according to veteran lawyers, is we aren't opposed to taxation, but the profession's specific character must be acknowledged. It's not just about the money, it's about the nature of the work.
And there are warnings about the broader impact.
Yes. Baruch Nagussi, a former tax official, cautions that tax policy needs to reflect the function of the service being taxed. If you apply a one-size-fits-all approach, he warns, it risks weakening institutions vital to the rule of law. It could impact access to justice if it makes legal practice unviable for many.
So this deep dive, pulling these threads from Addis Fortune, it really paints a picture of Ethiopia in profound transformation, doesn't it?
Absolutely. From the minibus queues on the streets to the national budget debates, the courtrooms, the plans for global trade, it's change everywhere.
And behind every policy shift, every statistic, there are these complex layers, these human stories.
And that common thread we talked about at the start, the immense challenge of pushing forward with ambitious reforms.
While dealing with the real-world consequences, the disruptions, trying to keep things stable.
It's that constant tension between the grand vision and the practical reality on the ground. Aspiration versus practicality.
So thinking about all this, the question for you, our listener, might be, as Ethiopia pushes to modernize, to grow, where does that balance really lie?
Between the bold policy ambition and the human cost, the economic realities.
Yeah. And what do these stories tell us about the pace of change? How much transformation can a society absorb at once?
Definitely food for thought.
Lots to think about. We really encourage you to keep exploring these vital topics. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
Join us next time.